Your house is lovely, my daughter-in-law said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that did not reach her eyes. My parents will take the upstairs master suite. My sister and her kids will take the downstairs guest wing. And as for you, Gerald, the converted room behind the kitchen is just cozy enough for a man of your age. It is your duty to take them in after all family is everything. I stood up from the mahogany dining table, the same table where I had celebrated 30 Christmases with my late wife, and I smiled. The entire room went silent as I prepared to deliver the sentence that would change all of our lives forever. But before I tell you what I said, and how my own son sat there in silence while his wife planned to dismantle my life, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family members who mistook your kindness for weakness. I am Gerald, 71 years old, and until last week I thought I was living a peaceful retirement in the Victorian home I spent 40 years restoring. I was an architect for the city of Chicago, and this house was my masterpiece, a sanctuary I built for my wife Beatrice and our son Brandon. When Beatrice passed away 5 years ago, the silence in these hallways was deafening, but it was my silence, my memories, and my dignity. I never imagined that the greatest threat to my peace would not be time or illness, but the boy I raised and the woman he married. It started on a Friday evening. Brandon and Brittany had invited themselves over for dinner, which was not unusual, although usually it meant they needed something. A down payment for a new car, a signature on a loan, or simply a free meal at the finest steakhouse in the city. But this time, Brittany insisted we eat at home. She said she wanted it to be intimate. I should have known then that something was wrong. Brittany did not do intimate. She did grand, she did expensive, and she did calculating. We were sitting in the formal dining room. The chandelier, a crystal piece Beatrice and I had found in an antique shop in Vienna, cast a warm glow over the table. I had hired a private chef for the evening, wanting to treat them as I always did. We were eating roasted lamb, and the wine was a vintage Cabernet that I had been saving for a special occasion. The mood seemed pleasant enough, though Brandon looked pale. He kept pushing his food around his plate, refusing to meet my eyes. He looked like a child who had broken a vase and was waiting for his parents to notice. Brittany, on the other hand, was radiant. She was wearing a dress that likely cost more than my first car, bought no doubt with the supplementary credit card I gave Brandon for emergencies. She took a sip of wine, set the glass down with a deliberate clink, and looked around the room. "You know, Dad," she started, and I flinched internally. She only called me Dad when she wanted money. "This house is just so massive. It must be so lonely for you here all by yourself, rattling around in 4,000 square feet. It is dangerous, really. What if you fell? What if you had a heart attack? No one would find you for days." I wiped my mouth with a linen napkin and looked at her. "I am 71, Brittany, not invalid. I swim 3 times a week. I still consult for the firm. I am perfectly capable of living in my own home." Brittany sighed, a theatrical sound of deep concern. "Of course you are, Gerald, but we have been thinking about the future. The market is tough right now, and you know Brandon and I have been struggling to upgrade from our condo. And then there is my family. My parents, Hank and Linda, they are having such a hard time. The economy has been cruel to them, and my sister Kayla raising those 2 boys alone. It breaks my heart." I took a sip of water, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. I knew they were struggling largely because Hank refused to work any job he felt was beneath him, and Linda spent money as if it were oxygen. But I did not see what that had to do with me. So Brittany continued, her smile widening, revealing perfectly whitened teeth. "We have come up with the perfect solution. A way to ensure you are never lonely and that everyone is taken care of. We are all going to move in here." I blinked. I looked at Brandon, waiting for him to laugh, to say it was a joke. But Brandon was staring at the tablecloth, his knuckles white as he gripped his fork. "Move in?" I asked, my voice calm, though my heart rate was beginning to climb. "Brittany, this house has 5 bedrooms. It is hardly a hotel." "Oh, we have it all figured out," she said, waving her hand dismissively. Like I said, my parents will take the master suite upstairs because their knees are bad and they need the jacuzzi tub. Brandon and I will take the 2 guest rooms on the east wing. Kayla and her boys can have the downstairs library and the den. We can put up temporary walls. And there is that lovely little room off the kitchen, the one the housekeeper used to use. It is small, but it is right next to the back door, so you can come and go easily. It is perfect for you. The audacity of it took my breath away. She was not asking to move in. She was evicting me from my own life within my own home. She was relegating me to the servant quarters in the house I had designed, paid for, and maintained for 4 decades. I looked at my son. "Brandon," I said, my voice low, "do you agree with this? You want to put your father in the maid's room so your in-laws can sleep in the bed where your mother died." Brandon finally looked up, his eyes watery and terrified. He looked at Brittany, then back at me. "Dad, look, it makes sense financially. You save on maintenance, we save on rent. And Brittany's parents really have nowhere else to go. You have so much space. It is selfish to keep it all to yourself." Selfish. The word hung in the air like smoke. I had paid for Brandon's college. I had paid for his wedding. I had paid the down payment on his condo. I had bailed him out of 3 failed business ventures. And now I was selfish. Brittany reached across the table and patted my hand. Her skin was cold. "Do not be difficult, Gerald. It is your duty. You are the patriarch. You are supposed to provide. Besides, think of how lively the house will be." I pulled my hand away. I did not yell. I did not flip the table. I was an architect. I understood structure, and I knew that when a load-bearing wall is compromised, you do not hit it with a sledgehammer immediately. You assess the damage. "I need time to think about this," I said, standing up. Brittany's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but then it returned sharper this time. "Of course. Take the weekend, but do not take too long. My parents have already started packing." I walked out of the dining room, leaving my half-eaten lamb on the table. As I climbed the stairs to the master bedroom, the room she wanted to give to her parents, I heard her voice drifting up from the dining room. She was on the phone. "Mom, start packing the boxes. The old man is crumbling. He will say yes. He is too weak to say no to Brandon." I went into my bedroom and locked the door. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the framed photo of Beatrice on the nightstand. Weak. She thought I was weak. She mistook my love for my son for a lack of spine. I did not sleep that night. I lay awake listening to the old house settle, the creaking of the floorboards, the wind against the window panes. This house was not just wood and stone. It was a repository of my life. And they wanted to turn it into a hostel for people who had never worked a day in their lives. I thought I had time. I thought I had at least a week to consult with my lawyer to figure out a way to let them down gently without losing my son. But I underestimated Brittany's greed. I underestimated how quickly a predator moves when they smell blood. Sunday morning arrived with the violent sound of diesel engines and the screech of air brakes. I was in the kitchen brewing my morning coffee, enjoying the only quiet hour of the day. The sun was streaming through the bay windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It was a peaceful ritual I had cherished since retirement. Then the noise shattered everything. I walked to the front window and pulled back the curtains. My heart stopped. 3 large moving trucks were backing into my driveway, crushing the hydrangeas I had planted just last spring. A beat-up sedan was parked on the lawn, its tires tearing up the manicured grass. I rushed to the front door, throwing it open. The cool morning air was thick with exhaust fumes. Standing in the middle of my driveway was a man I recognized as Hank Brittany's father. He was wearing a stained undershirt and smoking a cigarette, flicking the ash onto my cobblestone path. Next to him was Linda, pointing a finger at the movers, shouting instructions. "Careful with that. That goes to the master bedroom, top floor." I ran down the steps, my slippers skidding on the stone. "What is going on here?" I shouted. "Stop! Stop everything!" Hank turned to me, blowing a cloud of smoke in my direction. He looked at me with a smirk that mirrored his daughter's. "Hey there, Gerald. Morning. Just getting a head start. Brittany said you were cool with it." "I am not cool with anything," I yelled, waving my arms at the driver of the truck, who was lowering the ramp. "Get off my property. Who told you to come here?" Linda walked over, clutching a tacky porcelain vase. "Oh, stop making a scene, Gerald. The neighbors are watching. Brittany told us the deal was done. We had to be out of our apartment by noon today, or the landlord was calling the sheriff. So here we are. Be a gracious host and help Hank with the boxes." I stood there trembling with rage. This was an invasion. It was a hostile takeover. I turned to see Brandon's car pull up. Brittany hopped out looking fresh and energetic in workout clothes. Brandon followed, looking like he wanted to disappear into the pavement. "Brittany," I roared. "What is the meaning of this?" I said. I needed time to think. Brittany walked up to me, placing a hand on my shoulder, pushing me slightly back towards the house. "Oh, Gerald, don't be so dramatic. It was happening anyway. Why delay the inevitable? Look at them. My parents have nowhere to go. Would you really throw them out on the street? Would you really be that heartless in front of the whole neighborhood?" I looked around. Mrs. Higgins next door was peeking through her blinds. The gardener across the street had stopped his mower. I felt the heat rising in my neck. Shame. It was a powerful weapon, and she knew how to wield it. "Get them out," I said, my voice shaking. "Get them out now, or I call the police." Brittany stepped closer, lowering her voice so only I could hear. Her eyes went hard, the mask of the sweet daughter-in-law slipping completely. "Go ahead, Gerald. Call the police. But if you do, you will never see your son again. And you know that IVF treatment Brandon and I have been talking about, the one you promised to fund. If you kick my family out, that never happens. You will die alone in this big empty museum with no grandchildren, no legacy, just your money and your pride. Is that what you want?" I looked at Brandon. He was unloading a box from the trunk, avoiding my gaze entirely. He was complicit. He had chosen his side. If I called the police now, I would lose him. Brittany held the keys to the only thing I wanted more than my house, a future for my lineage. She saw the hesitation in my eyes. She saw the moment my shoulders slumped. "That is what I thought," she whispered, patting my cheek condescendingly. "Now go inside and make some coffee. Linda likes hers with 3 sugars. And stay out of the way, the movers have a schedule to keep." She brushed past me, shouting orders to her sister Kayla, who had just arrived with 2 screaming children. The kids ran past me, muddy shoes stomping on the pristine porch steps. One of them, a boy of about 8, ran straight into the living room and jumped onto the antique velvet armchair Beatrice had loved so much. I stood in the doorway, watching my sanctuary being violated. Hank walked past me carrying a crate of beer, bumping into my shoulder without saying, "Excuse me." Linda was already in the foyer, criticizing the color of the wallpaper. I retreated to my study, the only room with a heavy oak door that could block out the noise. I could hear the thumping of footsteps upstairs, directly above me in the master bedroom. The sound of heavy furniture being dragged across the hardwood floor sounded like nails on a chalkboard. They were dragging things across the floor I had sanded and varnished with my own hands. I sat at my drafting desk, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I reached for the phone to call the police, but my hand hovered over the receiver. Brittany's threat echoed in my mind. No grandchildren. Dying alone. I was trapped. They had used my love against me. They had weaponized my loneliness. I heard a crash from the living room, followed by Kayla's voice yelling, "It's fine." It was just an ugly old vase. It was not just a vase. It was a Ming replica Beatrice had bought on our honeymoon. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I realized then that shouting would not work. Anger would not work. They expected me to be the grumpy old man. They expected me to yell and then eventually surrender to their will because I was outnumbered and afraid of being alone. But they forgot who I was. I was an architect. I knew how to build things, but I also knew how to condemn a structure that was unsound. If they wanted to play a game of territory, they had chosen the wrong opponent. They saw a frail old man. They did not see the man who had navigated city zoning boards and ruthless contractors for 40 years. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out a small digital voice recorder. I placed it in my pocket. Then I opened my laptop and brought up the security camera feed. I had installed internal cameras years ago when we traveled, and I had never taken them down. They were discreet, hidden in the smoke detectors. On the screen, I watched Hank putting his feet up on the coffee table. I watched Linda opening my liquor cabinet. I watched Brittany directing the movers to take my wife's vanity table down to the basement. "Let them get comfortable," I whispered to the empty room. "Let them think they have won." I stood up, smoothed my sweater vest, and unlocked the door. I walked out into the chaos of my living room. Brittany was there, holding a clipboard. "Changed your mind, Dad?" she asked, smirking. I looked at her, forcing a smile that felt like it was carved out of stone. "You are right, Brittany," I said, my voice steady. "Family is important. Let's get everyone settled." Her eyes lit up with triumph. She thought she had broken me. She thought the game was over. She had no idea that I had just laid the first brick of her prison. They say it takes 21 days to form a new habit, but it took less than 30 days for my life's work to be turned into a landfill. 1 month. That was all it took for the sanctuary I had built with Beatrice to be stripped of its dignity layer by agonizing layer. If you have never watched your own home die, be grateful. It is not a sudden death like a fire or a storm. It is a slow, humiliating decay. It starts with a smell. When I used to walk through the front door of my Victorian home, the air always smelled of lemon polish, old paper, and the faint, sweet scent of dried lavender that Beatrice used to keep in bowls in the hallway. It was the scent of order, the scent of peace. Now, when I opened the door, I was hit by a wall of stale air that smelled of fried grease, unwashed laundry, and the acrid, choking stench of cheap tobacco. I remember standing in the foyer on the 4th Sunday of their invasion. I looked down at the hand-laid parquet floor. I had installed that floor myself 30 years ago, selecting each piece of oak and walnut, arranging them in a herringbone pattern that caught the afternoon light perfectly. Beatrice used to make everyone take their shoes off at the door. She would say that the outside world stayed outside. But now there was a streak of dried mud running from the door all the way to the kitchen. It looked like a scar across the wood. A bicycle, a child's bright red bicycle with dirty training wheels, was leaned up against the wainscoting, the rubber handle digging a deep scratch into the white paint I had touched up just last spring. I walked further inside my chest, tight like an iron band was squeezing my ribs. The silence I used to cherish was gone. In its place was a constant low-level roar. The television in the living room was blasting cartoons at a volume that rattled the windows. Above me, I could hear the heavy thudding footsteps of Hank and Linda moving around in the master suite. My suite. I walked into the living room, and my heart physically hurt. Hank was sprawled out on my Italian leather sofa. He was wearing boxer shorts and a stained undershirt, his bare feet resting on the coffee table. The same coffee table that was an antique map chest from the 18th century. He had a beer can balanced on his stomach and a cigarette dangling from his lips. I froze. The rule had always been absolute. No smoking in the house. Beatrice had asthma, and even after she passed, I kept the rule out of respect for the fabrics, the art, and the history of the walls. "Hank," I said, my voice trembling, not with fear, but with a rage I was struggling to contain. "Please put that out. You know the rules. No smoking inside." Hank did not even look at me. He kept his eyes on the television screen. He took a long drag of the cigarette, the tip glowing bright orange, and then he exhaled a thick cloud of gray smoke directly toward the ceiling. "Relax, Gerald," he grunted. "It is raining outside. You want me to catch pneumonia? Besides, this place is so drafty the smoke clears out in a second." He tapped the ash. He did not use an ashtray. He tapped it directly onto the Persian rug. The gray flakes settled into the deep red wool like snow on a battlefield. That rug was a wedding gift from my parents. I walked over to the window to open it, desperate for fresh air. As I reached for the heavy silk curtains, I stopped. The fabric, once a shimmering gold that caught the sunlight, was dull and gray. I brought the fabric up to my nose. It reeked of smoke. It was embedded in the fibers. The damage was not just on the surface. It was chemical. The tar had leached into the soul of the room. I turned to say something, anything, to make him understand that he was destroying something irreplaceable. But then Kayla walked in. Brittany's sister was a force of chaos in human form. She was holding a bag of fast food, and her 2 boys were trailing behind her, their hands sticky with something orange. Grandpa Gerald, one of the boys, screamed, though I was not his grandfather and never wished to be. He ran past me, wiping his orange hands on the wall as he turned the corner. I stared at the smear of grease on the William Morris wallpaper. That wallpaper was no longer in production. It was irreplaceable. Kayla dumped the food on the dining table. Not on a placemat. Not on a plate. Just the greasy paper bag directly onto the French polished mahogany. "Hey, Gerald," she said, chewing gum loudly. "The dishwasher is broken again. You really need to buy a new one. This old stuff is garbage. It was a Miele industrial dishwasher. It was broken because she had tried to wash a pair of muddy sneakers in it 2 days ago." "I am not buying a new dishwasher, Kayla," I said, my voice low. "And please tell your son not to wipe his hands on the walls." Kayla rolled her eyes, ripping open a packet of ketchup with her teeth. "He is just a kid, Gerald. Let him express himself." "You are so uptight. No wonder Brandon says you are miserable to live with." The comment hit me harder than the smell of smoke. Brandon said that my son, who I used to build Lego castles with on this very floor, was discussing my misery with these people. I turned and walked away. I could not stay in the room. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life, invisible and unwanted, yet unable to leave. I walked through the kitchen, which was a disaster zone of piled-up dishes and spilled milk that had gone sour, and headed toward the back of the house, toward my new reality. The room Brittany had graciously allowed me to occupy was formerly the scullery maid's room, built in 1910. It was a small, narrow space behind the kitchen pantry. It was designed for a servant who would wake up before the family to light the fires. It was never meant for a 71-year-old man with arthritis. I opened the door and stepped inside. The air here was different. It was cold, damp. There was a single window that looked out onto the brick wall of the neighbor's garage, letting in almost no light. The room was just big enough for a twin bed and a small chest of drawers. I sat down on the bed. The mattress was thin and lumpy, a leftover from when Brandon was in college. Every night the springs dug into my hips and shoulders. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the psychological torture of looking at the 4 walls closing in on me. Above my head, the ceiling creaked. Heavy footsteps moved back and forth. It was the master bedroom directly above. I could hear Hank laughing. I could hear the television in their room. They were living in the suite with the fireplace and the south-facing balcony, while I was sitting in a room that smelled of mildew and despair. I looked at the corner of the room where the wallpaper was peeling. There was a water stain spreading down from the ceiling, dark and ugly. A pipe was leaking somewhere between the floors. I knew exactly which pipe it was. I had drawn the schematics for the plumbing renovation 10 years ago. It was a minor leak, easy to fix if you caught it early. But I did not call a plumber. I did not get my tools. I sat there and watched a single drop of water form on the ceiling plaster. It grew heavy, shimmering in the dim light, and then fell, landing with a soft plip on the floorboards. Plip, plip, plip. It was the sound of the house crying. I lay back on the bed and pulled the thin blanket up to my chin. It was only 3 in the afternoon, but I had nowhere else to go. If I went to the living room, I was mocked. If I went to the kitchen, I was ordered to fix things I had not broken. If I went to the garden, I would see the tire tracks on my lawn. So I stayed in the dark. But as I lay there, listening to the destruction of my home, something began to shift inside me. For the first few weeks, I had felt shock, then grief, then a deep, hollow depression. But staring at that water stain, I felt something else. A cold, hard clarity. They thought they were destroying my house. They thought they were breaking my spirit by forcing me into the shadows. But they did not understand the nature of architecture. A building is not just walls and a roof. It is a system. It relies on maintenance. It relies on care. When you stop caring for a system, it does not just degrade. It becomes dangerous. They were treating this house like a limitless resource, something to be consumed. They did not know about the boiler's idiosyncrasies. They did not know which circuit breakers were sensitive. They did not know that the retaining wall in the garden needed to be reinforced before the heavy rains came. I closed my eyes and listened to the chaos upstairs. "Enjoy the master suite, Hank," I whispered into the darkness. "Enjoy the view, Linda. Enjoy the freedom, Kayla. Because you are not living in a palace. You are living in a machine that you do not understand. And I am the only one who has the manual." I turned over the bed springs, screeching in protest. I did not sleep. I began to make a list in my head. Not a list of repairs, a list of weaknesses. The leak in the ceiling was number 1. The old wiring in the guest wing was number 2. The zoning restrictions regarding the property line were number 3. They wanted me to be the maid fine. I would be the maid. I would be the invisible, silent observer who saw everything, heard everything, and documented every single crack in the foundation. The humiliation of this room, the smell of that smoke, the sight of that grease on the wall, it was fuel. Every indignity was a brick in the wall of evidence I was building. I reached under the mattress and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook. I clicked my pen. Entry 32. I wrote my hand steady in the dim light. Damage to load-bearing floorboards in hallway due to improper use. Smoke damage to original 1980 silk drapery. Unauthorized modification of electrical outlets in the kitchen by Kayla. I snapped the notebook shut. My house was becoming a dump, yes, but it was also becoming a trap. And they were walking right into it, one muddy footprint at a time. If the loss of my bedroom was the first blow, the financial bleeding that followed was the slow, calculated draining of my life force. I had worked for 45 years to build a cushion for my twilight years, a nest egg that was supposed to ensure I never became a burden to anyone. I had invested wisely, saved prudently, and lived below my means even when I was earning a chief architect's salary. I did all of this so that my final years would be defined by dignity travel and perhaps a small sailboat on the lake. But within 4 weeks of the invasion, my retirement fund was no longer a safety net. It was becoming their personal ATM. It began on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting in my cramped room behind the kitchen trying to read a book by the light of a single flickering bulb when the door flew open. There was no knock. There never was anymore. Privacy was a concept that had died the day the moving trucks arrived. Brittany stood in the doorway holding a thick envelope. She did not look happy. In fact, she looked like a manager disappointed with an incompetent employee. She tossed the envelope onto my narrow bed. It landed with a heavy thud. "You need to take care of this, Gerald," she said, her voice sharp, and quickly. The electric company sent a final notice. I picked up the envelope. It was already opened. I pulled out the bill and my eyes widened behind my reading glasses. $2,400 for 1 month. My usual electric bill, even in the height of winter, had never exceeded $400. I stared at the numbers, trying to make sense of them. "Brittany," I said, looking up at her, "this is impossible. This is 5 times the normal amount. What on earth is going on?" She rolled her eyes, leaning against the doorframe, checking her manicured nails. "Well, obviously, usage has gone up, Gerald. We are a large family. My parents need the heating on high because of their joints. Kayla's boys leave the lights on. And we have to run the pool heater 24/7 because you never know when clients might drop by. It is part of the image." The pool heater. It was October in Chicago. No one was swimming. They were heating 20,000 gallons of water just to watch the steam rise while they smoked cigarettes on the patio. "I cannot pay this, Brittany," I said, my voice firm. "This is exorbitant. If your parents want the heat at tropical levels, they need to contribute. If you want the pool heated, you need to pay for the gas." Brittany's face hardened. She took a step into the room, looming over me. "Contribute." She laughed, a cold, dry sound. "My parents are guests, Gerald. You do not ask guests to pay bills. That is incredibly rude. And as for Brandon and me, we are saving every penny for the baby. You know, stress is bad for the pregnancy. Do you want to stress me out over a few dollars? Do you want to risk your grandchild's health because you are too stingy to keep the house warm?" The grandchild card. She played it every single time. It was the ultimate silencer. I looked at the bill again. I knew I had the money, but that was not the point. The point was the principle. But I also knew that if the power was cut, the first person they would blame was me. They would tell the neighbors I was letting a pregnant woman freeze. "I will pay it," I whispered. "This one time. But we need to discuss a budget." "We will discuss it later," she said, turning on her heel. "Oh, and the water bill is on the counter. And the internet bill." We upgraded to the business package. Kayla's kids need faster speed for their games. She walked out, leaving me with the paper evidence of their gluttony. I paid the bills. I wrote the checks with a shaking hand, watching my monthly budget evaporate in seconds. But the bills were just the administrative fee for living in hell. The real cost was the servitude. Brittany had decided that since she was a real estate agent, my house was now her primary marketing tool. She began hosting mixers. That was what she called them. In reality, they were raucous parties for people I did not know, fueled by my liquor cabinet and catered by her ego. 3 nights a week, I would hear the doorbell ringing incessantly. Strangers would flood into my hallway, tracking mud on the carpets, laughing loudly, holding glasses of red wine that sloshed dangerously close to my pristine white sofas. I was told to stay in my room during these events, but inevitably, around 9 o'clock, the door would open. Gerald, Brittany would call out, "Not Dad, never Dad," in front of company. "We are out of ice," and someone spilled salsa on the rug in the den. "Be a dear and handle that, would you?" She would say it with a smile loud enough for her guests to hear. To them, it sounded like she was asking a favor of a beloved elder. To me, it was a command to a servant. I remember one specific evening, a Thursday. I was exhausted. I had spent the day fixing the garbage disposal that Hank had jammed with chicken bones. I was lying in bed when Brittany appeared. She was wearing a sequined dress holding a flute of champagne. "Gerald, get up," she said. "I need you to pass the hors d'oeuvres. The catering girl went home sick." "I am not your waiter, Brittany," I said, sitting up. "I am the owner of this house. Not tonight." "You aren't," she hissed. "Tonight you are helping family. There is a potential investor out there worth $5 million. If this goes well, Brandon and I are set. Do not ruin this for your son. Put on a tie, and try to look less pathetic." I put on the tie. I walked out into the living room holding a silver tray of canapés. The music was thumping. The air was thick with perfume and cologne. I weaved through the crowd of strangers who were leaning on my antique statues and using my coasters as ashtrays. "Excuse me," a man said, snapping his fingers at me. He was young, arrogant, wearing a suit that was too tight. "Old-timer, take this." He shoved an empty, sticky wine glass onto my tray. "And bring me another Pinot Noir. Make it the good stuff." I looked at him. I wanted to throw the tray on the floor. I wanted to grab him by the collar and tell him that the floor he was standing on was worth more than his life. But then I saw Brandon across the room. My son was laughing. He was holding court with a group of people holding a glass of whiskey, my whiskey. He looked happy. He looked successful. He looked like the man I always wanted him to be, except it was all a lie. It was a costume drama paid for by my suffering. Brandon saw me. He saw the young man snap his fingers at me. For a second, our eyes locked. I waited for him to step in. I waited for him to say, "That is my father, show some respect." Brandon looked away. He took a sip of his drink and turned his back to me, continuing his conversation. That was the moment the last thread of hope snapped. My son was not a victim. He was a willing participant. I took the empty glass. I walked to the kitchen. I did not bring the man his Pinot Noir. Instead, I went to the pantry and took out my notebook. "Entry 42, I wrote. Forced labor at unauthorized commercial event. Degradation of homeowner status. Son Brandon witnessed abuse and failed to intervene. I was documenting the emotional abuse, but I soon discovered that the abuse was not just emotional. It was criminal. I had always been meticulous with my banking. Every Friday, I reconciled my accounts. It was a habit from my days managing multi-million-dollar city budgets. 2 weeks after the party, I sat down at my laptop to check my retirement portfolio. I logged in expecting to see the usual interest accruals. Instead, I saw a withdrawal. $15,000. My heart stopped. I refreshed the page. The number remained. A transfer of $15,000 to an account named B&B Ventures, LLC. I knew that name. It was the shell company Brandon had set up for his freelance consulting a business that had never produced a single client. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. This was not a bill. This was theft. I printed the statement. I walked out of my room past the kitchen where Linda was frying something that smelled of burnt grease and straight to the living room where Brandon was playing video games on the new 80-inch television I had supposedly bought. "Brandon," I said. My voice was quiet, but it had a vibration to it that made him pause the game. He looked up, annoyed. "What is it, Dad?" "I am in the middle of a raid." I held up the paper. "What is this?" I asked. $15,000 transferred from my savings account to your LLC. "I did not authorize this." Brandon's face went pale. He stood up looking toward the hallway to see if Brittany was around. She wasn't. "Dad, listen," he stammered, his hands coming up in a defensive posture. "It is a loan, just a short-term loan. Brittany found this amazing investment opportunity. Vintage handbags. She buys them, holds them for a month, and sells them for double. It is guaranteed profit." "Handbags?" I repeated, disbelief washing over me. "You stole $15,000 from my retirement to buy purses. It is not stealing." Brandon hissed, his voice rising in panic. "We are investing. We are doing this for the family. For the baby. Do you know how expensive college is going to be? We are trying to build a future, and you are sitting on this pile of cash doing nothing." "You forged my signature on the transfer order," I said. "I saw the digital copy. That is a felony." "Brandon, that is fraud." Brandon's face twisted. It wasn't fear anymore. It was anger. The entitlement of a child who has never been told no. "So what are you going to do? Call the cops on your own son?" He stepped closer, towering over me. You going to send the father of your grandchild to jail over some paper? You know Brittany will leave me if I don't come through with this money. She will take the baby and disappear. You will never see us again. Is that what you want for 15 grand? I looked at him. I looked at the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the boy I had held when he scraped his knee. That boy was dead. In front of me stood a stranger, a desperate, weak man who was willing to cannibalize his own father to appease a tyrant. I lowered the paper. No, Brandon, I said softly. I won't call the police. Not today. Relief washed over him. He slumped back onto the couch, picking up his controller. Thanks, Dad. You won't regret it. We will pay you back double next month. You'll see. He unpaused the game. The sounds of explosions and gunfire filled the room again. I turned and walked back to my room. I did not cry. I did not scream. I sat down at my desk and pulled out a different file. A file I had named the nuclear option. I placed the bank statement in the file. You won't pay me back next month, Brandon, I whispered to the empty room. Because next month you won't be worried about money. You will be worried about freedom. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had not called in years. It rang twice before a deep, gravelly voice answered. Sullivan, I said. Gerald. Is everything all right? You sound cold. Everything is fine, Sullivan, I said, staring at the water stain on the ceiling. But I need you to prepare the paperwork for a forensic audit of my accounts. And Sullivan. Get the eviction notices ready. We are going to need them sooner than I thought. I hung up the phone. Upstairs, I heard Brittany's heels clicking on the floorboards. She was home. She was probably carrying the investments purchased with my life savings. Let them shop. Let them feast. Let them play their games on my television and sleep in my bed. They were eating the bait, and soon the trap would snap shut. November 14th. It is a date that is burned into my soul with a branding iron. To the rest of the world, it was just a Tuesday. To the postman who delivered the mail to the cashier at the grocery store, to the people rushing past on the sidewalk, it was just another ordinary day. But to me, it was the day the music died. It was the 5th anniversary of the day Beatrice took her last breath in the master bedroom upstairs, the very same room where Hank and Linda now slept and snored and watched reality television. Every year for the past 5 years, I have had a ritual. I would buy a dozen white lilies, her favorite flower. I would light a single vanilla candle in the library, pour 2 glasses of wine, and sit in silence listening to the records we used to dance to. It was a sacred time, a time to mourn, to remember, and to feel her presence in the house we built together. It was the one day a year I allowed myself to fully break down. I had told them. 2 days ago during breakfast, I had looked Brittany in the eye and told her, Tuesday is the anniversary of Beatrice's passing. I need the house to be quiet. Please, just for one evening. No guests. No parties. Just peace. Brittany had nodded, looking at her phone. Sure, Gerald. Whatever. We will be out anyway. I believed her. I was a fool. The evening began quietly enough. I was in the library, or what used to be the library, before Kayla turned it into a playroom for her destructive children. I had managed to clear a small space on the desk for Beatrice's portrait. It was a beautiful oil painting we had commissioned in Florence 30 years ago. In the painting, she was smiling that soft, knowing smile that used to calm my storms. I lit the candle. I closed my eyes. For a moment, I could almost smell her perfume. Then the bass started. It began as a low thrumming in the floorboards, a vibration that rattled the teacup on the desk. Then it grew louder. A heavy, synthesized beat that clawed its way through the walls. I heard shouting. I heard laughter. I heard the distinct sound of a microphone feedback screeching. I opened the library door, and the noise hit me like a physical blow. It was not just music. It was karaoke. Bad, drunken, screaming karaoke. I walked into the living room and stopped dead in my tracks. The room was packed. There were at least 20 people, most of them strangers, some I recognized as Brittany's loud friends from the real estate agency. The furniture had been pushed against the walls. A disco ball, a cheap spinning light that threw nauseating colors around the room, was set up on my antique sideboard. Hank was holding a microphone, his face red and sweaty, bellowing out the lyrics to a rock song he did not know. Linda was dancing on the coffee table. My coffee table. She was wearing heels. I could hear the wood splintering under her weight. But it was not just the noise. It was the disrespect. They were celebrating. On the night of my wife's death in her house, they were throwing a frat party. I scanned the room for Brandon. I found him near the makeshift bar they had set up in the kitchen. He was laughing, pouring shots of tequila for Kayla and her friends. He looked up and saw me. For a second, his smile faltered. He knew what day it was. He knew. I had reminded him this morning. I walked over to the music system. I did not ask. I did not plead. I reached down and yanked the power cord out of the wall. The silence that followed was sudden and violent. Hank stopped singing mid-shout. Linda froze on the table. The guests turned to look at me, the old man in the cardigan standing next to the stereo with a shaking hand. "Get out," I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the room. "Everyone, get out, now." Brittany pushed her way through the crowd. She was wearing a glittery dress and holding a slice of cake. Chocolate cake. "Oh my God, Gerald," she groaned, rolling her eyes. "You are such a buzzkill. Plug it back in. We are celebrating. Hank just won $50 on a scratch-off ticket." I stared at her. "I told you," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of grief and rage. "I told you what today is. It is November 14th. "So what?" she snapped, taking a bite of the cake. "It is just a day." "Beatrice is dead, Gerald. She has been dead for 5 years. She does not care if we listen to music. Stop being so dramatic and let us live. You are dragging everyone down with your depression." From the corner of the room, Kayla's 2 sons came running. They were screaming, chasing each other. They were holding plates of cake. They were using the cake as ammunition. "Hey, watch this," one of them yelled. He wound up his arm and threw a handful of chocolate cake. He was aiming for his brother, who was standing near the library door. The brother ducked. The cake sailed past him. Time seemed to slow down. I watched the dark, sticky mass fly through the air. I watched it arc across the room, and I watched it land with a sickening splat right in the center of the easel I had set up, right on Beatrice's face. The room went silent. The chocolate frosting smeared across her eyes, her smile the delicate brushstrokes that captured her soul. A lump of greasy cake slid slowly down the canvas and landed on the floor. My heart stopped. The world turned gray. It was not just a painting. It was a desecration. It was as if they had walked into the cemetery and spat on her grave. "No," I screamed. It was a sound I did not know I could make, a primal wounded roar. I lunged forward. I did not care about the guests. I did not care about my dignity. I ran toward the painting, grabbing a napkin from a table, desperate to wipe the grease off before it stained the oil paint. "I have to save her," I muttered, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold the napkin. "Get it off, get it off." I reached the painting, my tears blinding me. I started to dab at the frosting, frantic, terrified. Suddenly, I felt hands on my shoulders. Strong hands. Rough hands. "Stop it!" a voice yelled. I was spun around. It was Brandon, my son. I looked at him, tears streaming down my face. "Brandon, look! Look what they did! Help me! We have to clean it!" Brandon did not look at the painting. He looked at Brittany, who was standing there with her arms crossed, looking annoyed. "He is ruining the party, Brandon," she said coldly. "He is making a scene. He is embarrassing us. Get him out of here. Brandon turned back to me. His eyes were hard. There was no love in them, no sympathy. Only the cold, dead look of a man who had sold his soul. "Dad, stop it," he shouted. "It is just a picture. You are acting like a lunatic." I tried to push past him to get to the painting again. "No, let me go," and then he did it. He did not just block me. He shoved me. He placed both hands on my chest and pushed with all his strength. I stumbled back. My foot caught on the edge of the rug. I flailed, trying to find balance, but I was 71 years old. I fell. I hit the hardwood floor hard. My hip slammed against the ground, sending a bolt of white-hot pain shooting up my spine. My head bounced against the floorboards. I lay there, stunned, gasping for air. The pain in my hip was excruciating, but it was nothing compared to the pain in my heart. My son had pushed me. My son, the boy I had carried on my shoulders, the boy I had taught to walk, had just thrown me to the ground to protect his wife's ego. The room was deathly silent. Even the children stopped running. Brandon stood over me, his chest heaving. He looked at his hands, then at me. For a split second, I saw regret. I saw him take a half step forward, his hand reaching out. "Dad," he whispered. But then Brittany stepped up beside him. She put a hand on his arm, restraining him. "Leave him," she said, her voice loud and clear. "He is fine. He is just looking for attention. He probably threw himself down." She looked down at me, her eyes filled with disgust. "If you cannot behave like a normal person, Gerald, stay in your room. We are sick of walking on eggshells around your grief. Beatrice is gone. Get over it." She grabbed Brandon's hand and pulled him away. "Come on, babe. Let's go to the kitchen. The vibe is dead in here anyway." Brandon let her pull him. He turned his back on me. He walked away, leaving his father lying on the floor in pain next to the ruined portrait of his mother. I lay there for a long time. I watched the ceiling fans spin. I listened to them shuffle out of the room. I heard the music start up again, lower this time, but still there. I slowly rolled onto my side. I gritted my teeth against the pain in my hip. I used the leg of the table to pull myself up. It took me 5 minutes to stand. I limped over to the painting. I took the napkin and very gently, very carefully, wiped the rest of the cake off her face. The oil was stained. There was a dark grease mark on her cheek that would never come out. I touched the canvas. "I am sorry, Beatrice," I whispered. "I failed to protect you." I turned and looked at the empty room, at the crushed cups, the dirt, the stain on the floor where I had fallen. I limped toward the hallway. I did not go to my room. I went to the front closet where I kept my heavy winter coats. I reached into the inside pocket of my old trench coat and pulled out the digital recorder. It was still recording. I stopped the recording. I saved the file. Then I took out my phone. I dialed Sullivan. It was almost midnight. Gerald Sullivan answered, his voice thick with sleep. "What is it, Sullivan?" I said. My voice was calm, dead calm. It was the voice of a man who had nothing left to lose. "I want you to file the charges." "Charges?" Sullivan asked, waking up instantly. "What charges?" "Assault," I said, "and destruction of property." And Sullivan, "Call the board of the Historical Preservation Trust. Tell them I am ready to hand over the keys. Tell them the tenants have violated the life estate agreement." But Gerald Sullivan stammered. That means everyone gets evicted, including you. You will lose the right to live there." I looked at the portrait one last time. "This is not a home anymore, Sullivan," I said. "It is a crime scene. Burn it down. Burn it all down." I hung up the phone. I did not feel pain in my hip anymore. I felt nothing but the cold steel resolve of a demolition expert pressing the button. The countdown had ended. The explosion was coming. After the night they destroyed Beatrice's painting, the war moved from the open battlefield of the living room to the silent, terrifying trenches of my own mind. They knew that pushing me physically was a mistake. They saw the look in my eyes when I stood up from that floor. They knew that if I had bruises, I had evidence. So they changed tactics. They decided that if they could not break my bones without consequences, they would break my sanity instead. It started innocently enough, or at least that is what I told myself in the beginning. It was the tea. Every evening, Linda, who had never lifted a finger to help with housework before, suddenly insisted on making me a cup of herbal tea before bed. "Here you go, Gerald," she would say, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet concern that made my skin crawl. "Chamomile. It will help you sleep. You have been looking so frazzled lately." I drank it. I drank it because I was exhausted, because my hip was throbbing from the fall, and because part of me, the foolish, optimistic part, wanted to believe that maybe they felt guilty. Maybe this was an olive branch. But 20 minutes after finishing the cup, the fog would roll in. It was not a natural tiredness. It was a heavy, suffocating gray blanket that wrapped around my brain. My limbs would feel like lead. My thoughts, usually sharp and architectural, would dissolve into a slurry of confusion. I would find myself staring at the wall for an hour, unable to remember what I was supposed to be doing. One morning I woke up with a headache that felt like a drill boring into my temples. I stumbled into the kitchen, desperate for coffee. Brittany was there feeding her baby niece, Kayla's youngest. She looked up at me and smiled. It was the smile of a shark circling a wounded seal. "Rough night, Gerald?" she asked. "You were pacing the hallway again, talking to yourself. It was really creeping Kayla out." I frowned, rubbing my temples. Pacing, I did not pace. I slept like the dead. "I was asleep, Brittany," I croaked. She laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "You think you were asleep, but you were walking around knocking on doors asking for Beatrice. It is getting worse, Gerald. Honestly, we are getting worried." I stared at her. I had no memory of this. None. But the doubt, that tiny, insidious seed, was planted. Had I been walking? Was the grief finally cracking my mind? Then things started to disappear. I have always been a man of routine. My keys go in the brass bowl by the door. My wallet goes in the top drawer of the nightstand. My reading glasses go in the pocket of my shirt. A place for everything, and everything in its place. It is how I built skyscrapers, and it is how I lived my life. But suddenly, the system failed. I would reach for my keys, and the bowl would be empty. I would spend an hour tearing my room apart, my heart hammering in my chest, only to find them in the refrigerator, sitting next to a carton of milk. I would look for my wallet, and it would be gone. Panic would set in. My ID, my credit cards, my life. I would ask Brandon, and he would sigh, that long, suffering sigh of a martyr. "Check the trash, Dad," he would say without looking up from his phone. "You threw it out last week, remember?" And there it would be, resting on top of a pile of coffee grounds in the kitchen bin. I pulled it out, wiping off the grime, my hands shaking. "I did not throw this out," I whispered. "I know I did not." Brandon would exchange a look with Brittany, a look of pity, a look that said, "The old man is gone." "See," Brittany would say softly. "You are forgetting things, Gerald. Important things. Maybe it is time we took over the finances. You know, just to keep your money safe from yourself." For a week I believed them. I truly believed I was losing my mind. I sat in my room terrified to leave, terrified to touch anything lest I misplace it or destroy it. I questioned every memory. I doubted every thought. I felt like I was drowning in the middle of the ocean, and the only people who could throw me a life preserver were the ones holding my head under water. But the architect in me saved me. An architect looks for patterns. An architect knows that structures do not just collapse randomly. There is always a stress point. The stress point was the tea. I realized that the confusion always peaked exactly 30 minutes after Linda gave me that mug. And I realized that my keys only went missing on the days I drank it. So on a Thursday night, I decided to test the structure. Linda brought the tea. "Here, Gerald, drink up." I took the mug. I went to my room. I poured the steaming liquid into the potted fern by the window. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and waited. 30 minutes passed. My mind was clear. My limbs were light. I heard footsteps outside my door. Soft, creeping footsteps. I lay back on the bed, closing my eyes, breathing heavily, feigning the deep, drugged sleep they expected. The door creaked open. I watched through the slit of my eyelids. It was Brittany. She tiptoed into the room. She did not look at me. She went straight to my dresser. She picked up my watch, a vintage Omega that Beatrice had given me for our 25th anniversary. She slipped it into her pocket. Then she picked up my glasses. She walked out, leaving the door slightly ajar. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would crack my ribs. I was not crazy. I was not senile. I was the victim of a calculated domestic conspiracy. They were stealing my sanity to justify stealing my property. I wanted to jump up and scream. I wanted to run out and confront them. But I knew that would be suicide. They had the narrative. They had the concerned family act perfected. If I yelled, I was just the aggressive, confused old man proving their point. No. I had to wait. I had to let them play their hand. And play it they did the very next morning. I woke up early, retrieved my glasses from the trash can in the bathroom, where Brittany had undoubtedly placed them, and went to the kitchen. I made toast. I ate it black, drinking only water from the tap. I trusted nothing else. I went to the garden to inspect the damage to the rose bushes. I was out there for maybe 20 minutes. When I came back inside, the smell hit me instantly. Gas. Thick, heavy, nauseating natural gas. Panic, primal and immediate, seized me. I ran toward the kitchen. The smell was overpowering. The stove was hissing. All 4 burners were turned on full blast, but there was no flame. The gas was pouring into the room, filling the air with an explosive potential that made my skin prickle. I rushed forward, my hands trembling, and twisted the knobs off. My breath came in shallow gasps. My mind raced. Had I used the stove? No. I had made toast. In the toaster. I had not touched the stove. Suddenly, Brittany appeared in the doorway. She was holding a hanikwerkikifal to her nose, her eyes wide with a terror that looked almost genuine. "Oh my God!" she screamed. "Gerald! What have you done?" Brandon came running down the stairs, followed by Linda and Hank. "What is it? What is that smell?" Brandon yelled. "He tried to kill us!" Brittany shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at me. He left the gas on. I came down and the whole kitchen was filled with it. If I had lit a candle... Oh my God. Brandon, we could have all died. I stood there, backed against the counter, shaking my head. "No," I whispered. "No, I didn't. I made toast. I did not touch the stove." "Toast," Linda yelled, stepping forward. "You probably tried to make eggs and forgot. Just like you forgot your wallet. Just like you forgot your keys. You are a danger to this family, Gerald." Brandon looked at me. His face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead. "Dad," he said, his voice cracking. Did you leave the burners on?" I looked at my son. I saw the fear in his eyes, but I also saw the relief. He needed this. He needed me to be the villain, so he did not have to be the bad guy. "I did not do this, Brandon," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos. "You know I am careful. You know I check everything twice." "Stop lying," Brittany screamed. She grabbed her phone. "That is it. I am calling Dr. Sterling. We cannot live like this anymore. I am not going to let you burn my baby alive before it is even born." She dialed, putting the phone on speaker. "Dr. Sterling, yes. It is Brittany Vance. It is Gerald. We had an incident, a gas leak. He left the stove on. Yes. All 4 burners. We barely caught it in time. I think it is time to discuss the competency hearing. Yes. We need him evaluated. Immediately. I listened to her lie. I listened to her dismantle my life with a phone call. And as I stood there smelling the gas that they had released, watching the performance they had rehearsed, a cold realization settled over me. This was not just about the house anymore. This was about freedom. If they declared me incompetent, if they got a doctor to sign off on dementia, they would get power of attorney over everything. My bank accounts, my pension, my decisions. They would lock me away in a state facility and live in my house, spending my money laughing at my grave while I was still breathing. I looked at the stove. I looked at the knobs. And I noticed something. The knobs were greasy. There was a smear of orange grease on the far left knob, the same orange grease from the cheese snacks Kayla's children ate by the handful. I did not eat cheese snacks. I did not have grease on my fingers. I looked at the ceiling corner where the smoke detector blinked with a tiny red light. The smoke detector that also housed the camera I had installed 3 years ago after a burglary scare in the neighborhood. Brittany was still on the phone, sobbing fake tears. Okay, doctor. Thank you. We will bring him in Monday. She hung up and looked at me. The tears vanished instantly. Her eyes were dry and hard as flint. You heard the doctor, Gerald. Monday morning. Until then, you are not to touch the stove. You are not to touch the car keys. You are to stay in your room where you cannot hurt anyone. Linda will bring you your meals. And your medicine, Linda added with a smirk. I looked at them. The tribunal of the ungrateful. Okay, I said softly. They blinked. They expected a fight. They expected me to scream that I was innocent. But I gave them submission. Okay, I repeated. I will go to my room. I am feeling very tired. Brittany nodded, satisfied. Good. Go. And Gerald, don't try anything. We are watching you. I walked past them. I walked past Brandon, who could not even look me in the face. I walked into my small, damp room and closed the door. I sat on the bed. I waited until I heard them move away, until I heard the television turn on and the laughter start up again. Then I reached under the loose floorboard beneath my bed. I pulled out my laptop. I opened the security program. My hands were not shaking anymore. I was an architect, and I was looking at the blueprints of their destruction. I scrubbed the timeline back to 20 minutes ago. There it was. On the screen in high definition, I saw Brittany walk into the kitchen. I saw her look around to make sure the coast was clean. I saw her walk to the stove. I saw her reach out and twist the knobs one by one. I saw her stand there for a moment, sniffing the air, waiting for the gas to fill the room before she turned and ran to the hallway to scream. I watched it 3 times. I saved the clip. I backed it up to the cloud. I backed it up to an external drive. Then I pulled out a protein bar I had hidden in my pillowcase. I ate it slowly, savoring the taste of clarity. They wanted to play Dr. Fine. We would play doctor. But when Monday came, I would be the one writing the prescription, and the medicine I was going to serve them would be bitter indeed. I lay back on the pillow, clutching the hard drive to my chest. Let them think I was crazy. Let them think I was weak. The gas was real, but the explosion was going to happen in a courtroom, and they wouldn't even smell it coming. Monday morning arrived with the color of wet slate. The sky outside my small high window was a bruised purple, threatening a storm that seemed to have been brewing since the moment my son and his wife invaded my home. I had spent the weekend in a state of self-imposed house arrest, listening to the muffled sounds of my life being dismantled on the other side of the door. I heard furniture being dragged. I heard the sharp tearing sound of packing tape. I heard them laughing. That was the worst part. the laughter. They were celebrating the gas leak incident as a victory. They believed they had finally broken the old horse, and now they were just deciding which glue factory to send him to. At 9:00 sharp, the door to my room opened. It was not Linda with breakfast. It was Brandon. My son was dressed in his best suit, a navy blue number I had bought him for his 30th birthday. He was shaved, his hair combed, and he held a leather portfolio under his arm. He looked like a professional. He looked like a man who had come to handle a difficult but necessary business transaction. But his eyes gave him away. They were red-rimmed, darting around the room, refusing to land on mine for more than a second. "Good morning, Dad," he said softly, closing the door behind him. He pulled up the only chair in the room, a wooden stool that made his knees sit higher than his waist, stripping him of some of his dignity. He placed the portfolio on his lap and clasped his hands together. "How are you feeling today?" he asked. The concern in his voice was so thick, so manufactured, it sounded like a bad line from a daytime soap opera. I sat up in bed, pulling the thin blanket around my shoulders. "I am fine, Brandon," I said. "I am just hungry. I haven't eaten since yesterday morning." Brandon winced. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a granola bar. "I am sorry, Dad." Brittany said, "Well, she thought it was best if we controlled your diet for a few days. The doctor said high blood sugar might be contributing to your confusion. We are just trying to help." The doctor. The invisible, silent doctor who was diagnosing me by proxy. He sighed, leaning forward. "Look, Dad, we need to talk. About Saturday. About the stove." I looked at him. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab him by his expensive lapels and shake him until the son I raised fell out of the shell of this coward. I wanted to tell him I had the video. I wanted to tell him I saw his wife twisting the knobs, releasing the poison into our home. But I couldn't. Not yet. The trap was not fully set. "I don't remember, Brandon," I lied, making my voice tremble slightly. "I remember making toast. And then just the smell." Brandon nodded eagerly, latching onto my performance. "Exactly. That is the scary part, Dad. You don't remember. That is what Dr. Sterling calls a dissociative fugue state. You are doing things, dangerous things, and your brain is just erasing the memory. It is really advanced, Dad." He paused, biting his lip, summoning tear songs that hovered on the waterline but never quite fell. "Brittany is terrified, Dad. She is scared for the baby. She is scared for you. We cannot watch you 24 hours a day. What if you wander outside in winter? What if you turn the gas on at night? We can't risk it." He unzipped the leather portfolio. The sound was like a zipper on a body bag. "We found a facility, Dad. A really nice one. It is called Whispering Pines. It has gardens, it has nurses, it has security. They can take care of you in a way we can't." I froze. This was it. The threat. The ultimatum. Either give us what we want or we lock you away. "I don't want to go to a home, Brandon," I whispered, letting real fear seep into my voice. "This is my home. I built this house. I know, Dad." "I know," Brandon soothed, reaching out to pat my knee. "And we don't want to send you there. Ideally, we want you to stay here. But we need to make sure we are legally protected. We need to make sure that if you have an accident, or if you spend all your money on something crazy because you are confused, we can step in and fix it." He pulled a thick stack of papers out of the portfolio. They were stapled together in blue legal backing. "This is a power of attorney, Dad, and a transfer of deed for the house." He said it so quickly, trying to bury the second part under the first. "Transfer of deed?" I asked, squinting at the papers. "It is just a formality," Brandon said quickly, his hands waving in the air. "It puts the house in a trust managed by me and Brittany. It means the government can't take it if you get sick. It protects your legacy, Dad. It allows us to manage your accounts, pay your bills, and ensure you have everything you need right here without going to a nursing home. If you sign this, you can stay. We will hire a private nurse. You can live out your days in your own room. The coercion was naked now. Sign the house over to us, give us control of your money, or we throw you in an asylum. Brandon reached into his pocket again. But this time he didn't pull out a pen. He pulled out a thermos. Here, he said, pouring steaming liquid into the plastic cup on my nightstand. Linda made this. It is a special blend. Valerian root and passion flower. It will help calm your nerves before you read the documents. You look shaking, Dad. Drink it. The smell hit me instantly. Beneath the floral scent of the tea, there was that distinct metallic bitter almond odor, phenobarbital, or perhaps a benzodiazepine crushed into powder. They weren't taking any chances. They wanted me pliable. They wanted me drugged so that if I ever tried to contest this in court, they could say I was medicated and compliant. I looked at the cup. I looked at Brandon. You want me to drink this now? I asked. Yes, please, Brandon urged, pushing the cup toward me. Just drink it. It will make everything easier. I lifted the cup. The steam warmed my face. I brought it to my lips. Brandon watched me like a hawk, his breath held. I tilted the cup. I let the liquid touch my lips, let a tiny amount enter my mouth, and then I pretended to swallow a large gulp. In reality, I held the liquid under my tongue, the bitter taste making me want to gag. I lowered the cup. Ah, I sighed. That is good. Finish it, Dad, Brandon said. I took another fake gulp and then another. When the cup was empty, I grabbed a tissue from the nightstand and pretended to wipe my mouth, spitting the toxic liquid into the paper mesh while feigning a cough. Excuse me, I wheezed, crumpling the tissue and dropping it into the trash can by the bed. Now we waited. Brandon sat there checking his watch. He was waiting for my eyes to glaze over. He was waiting for the slump in my shoulders. I decided to give it to him. 5 minutes later, I let my eyelids droop. I let my head loll slightly to the side. I let my hand, which was resting on the blanket, start to tremor rhythmically. Dad, Brandon asked, his voice sharp. I feel tired, Brandon, I slurred. So tired. That is okay, Dad. That is just the relaxation kicking in. Now let's get this done so you can sleep. He placed the document on the bedside table. He clicked a heavy, expensive fountain pen, my pen. I realized the one I had left in the study and placed it in my hand. Sign here, he said, pointing to the line at the bottom of the first page. And here. And on the last page. I looked at the paper. The words swam before my eyes, not because of the drugs, but because of the sheer density of the legalese. But I caught the key phrases. Irrevocable transfer. Full financial guardianship. Medical proxy. It was a death warrant for my freedom. I held the pen. My hand shook violently, an exaggeration of my natural tremor. The ink stained the paper in a jagged dot. I can't read it, Brandon, I mumbled. The letters are moving. You don't need to read it, Dad. Brandon said, his voice tight with impatience. I read it. It is standard. Just sign your name. Gerald Vance. Just like you taught me. Remember, I remembered. I remembered sitting at the kitchen table with a 6-year-old Brandon, his small hand in mine guiding a crayon across construction paper. Brandon. I remembered the pride in his eyes when he wrote it himself for the first time. I remembered telling him that a man's name is his bond, that his signature is his honor, and now he was using that lesson to strip me of mine. I took a deep breath. I let the pen hover over the signature line. Brandon leaned in his cologne, suffocating me. Do it, Dad. Do it for us. Do it for the baby. I pressed the pen to the paper. I knew exactly what I had to do. My legal name. The name on the deed to the house, the name on my bank accounts, and the name required for any binding legal document involving the Vance family trust was Gerald Thomas Vance. It was a detail I had insisted on years ago when I set up the trust with Sullivan. We had included a specific clause: any modification to the trust or transfer of assets required the full legal signature, including the middle name notarized in the presence of 2 independent witnesses. Brandon didn't know about the clause. He only knew the standard power of attorney forms he had downloaded off the internet or gotten from some cheap lawyer Brittany knew. I started to write. G-E-R-A-L-D. The letters were shaky, jagged, looking exactly like the scrawl of a man under the influence of heavy sedatives or dementia. "Keep going," Brandon whispered. V-A-N-C-E. I finished the signature. Gerald Vance. No middle name. No middle initial. And just to be sure to add another layer of legal defense, I let the pen slip at the end, creating a long, trailing ink stain that crossed out the word Vance slightly. I sat back, letting the pen drop from my fingers onto the sheets. Is that okay?" I whispered, closing my eyes. Brandon snatched the papers up. He didn't look closely at the signature. He just saw ink on the line. He saw victory. He saw the house, the money, the freedom from his wife's nagging. "Perfect, Dad," he breathed. "It is perfect." He quickly flipped to the other pages. "Sign this one, and this one." I repeated the process. Gerald Vance. Gerald Vance. Each time omitting the Thomas. Each time making the handwriting look more deteriorated than the last. When the final page was signed, Brandon stood up so fast the stool fell over with a clatter. He didn't pick it up. He was practically vibrating with adrenaline. "You did the right thing, Dad," he said, shoving the papers back into the portfolio and zipping it shut. "You really did. You are going to be safe now. We are going to take care of everything." He didn't say, "I love you." He didn't say, "Thank you." He just turned toward the door. "Rest now, Dad," he called over his shoulder. "I will tell Linda not to disturb you until dinner." The door closed. I heard the lock click. I lay there in the silence. I listened to his footsteps running down the hallway. I heard him shout, "Brittany, I got it." I heard Brittany squeal. I heard the pop of a cork, champagne. They were drinking champagne at 10 in the morning on a Monday. I opened my eyes. The fog of the fake drowsiness vanished instantly. I sat up and picked up the plastic cup from the trash can. There was still a residue of the drugged tea at the bottom. I reached under my mattress and pulled out a small Ziploc bag I had prepared. I placed the tissue with the spit-out tea inside it. Then I poured the few remaining drops from the cup into a second small vial I had saved from an old prescription. Evidence. They had a document signed by Gerald Vance. A document that any forensic handwriting expert would testify was signed under duress by a man whose handwriting showed clear signs of chemical impairment. But more importantly, they had a document that was legally void because it failed to meet the specific requirements of the trust they were trying to break. They thought they had just won the war. They thought they had captured the king. But they didn't know that the king had just abdicated the throne to a ghost. I lay back down, crossing my hands behind my head. I stared at the water stain on the ceiling. It looked a bit like a map. A map of the escape route I was building brick by brick, lie by lie. Let them celebrate. Let them file the papers. Let them walk into the bank and try to access the main vault. When the bank manager tells them that the signature is insufficient, when the clerk tells them that Gerald Vance does not have authorization to move the funds of Gerald Thomas Vance, the look on their faces will be worth every second of this humiliation. But I wasn't done yet. The power of attorney was just the shield. I needed a sword. I reached for my notebook again. Entry 51, I wrote. Coerced signature under threat of institutionalization. Administration of unknown sedative by Brandon Vance prior to signing. Deliberate alteration of signature to signal distress and invalidate document. I closed the book. The next few days would be difficult. They would start acting like owners. They would probably start renovations. They might even try to move me to a smaller room or the basement. I would let them. Because every dollar they spent, every wall they knocked down, every decision they made based on that worthless piece of paper was another nail in their coffin. I was not just an architect anymore. I was a demolition expert, and the charges were set. All I had to do now was wait for them to light the fuse themselves. October 31st arrived. Not with the playful chill of autumn, but with a suffocating sense of finality. It was Halloween, the night when the veil between the living and the dead is supposed to be thinnest, but in my house the monsters did not need a veil. They walked freely through the hallways wearing designer suits and false smiles. For Brittany, this was not just a holiday. It was her coronation. She had spent the last 3 days transforming my Victorian sanctuary into a grotesque haunted mansion. But she did not use tasteful decorations. She used cheap plastic horrors that mocked the dignity of the architecture. She draped synthetic cobwebs over the crystal chandeliers Beatrice and I had bought in Paris. She placed animatronic skeletons in the foyer, right next to the antique grandfather clock, so that every time the hour struck, a plastic skull would scream a high-pitched manic laugh. It was a metaphor for what my life had become. A cheap, loud, disrespectful horror show. At 4 in the afternoon, Brittany kicked open the door to my small room. She was holding a garment bag. She did not look at me. She looked through me as if I were already a ghost. "Get dressed, Gerald," she commanded, throwing the bag onto my cot. "The party starts at 7. I expect you in the foyer by 6:30 sharp to help the caterers set up the champagne tower." I opened the bag. Inside was a costume. It was not a dignified costume. It was a zombie butler outfit. A tattered gray suit covered in fake bloodstains with a mask that depicted rotting flesh and hanging skin. "You want me to wear this?" I asked, holding up the mask. "Brittany, I am 71 years old. I am the owner of this house." Brittany laughed, a sharp barking sound. "Not anymore, Gerald. Remember, you signed the papers. You are the dependent now. You are the ward. And tonight the theme is the decay of the old. It is funny. It is ironic. Or are you too senile to understand irony?" She stepped closer, her perfume overpowering the smell of mildew in my room. "Put it on, Gerald. And do not let me catch you taking off the mask. The guests do not want to see your real face. It is depressing. It kills the vibe. Just carry the trays, pour the wine, and stay silent. If you ruin this night, if you embarrass me in front of the partners from the firm, I swear to God, I will have you in Whispering Pines by tomorrow morning." She turned and left, slamming the door so hard the water pipe in the wall rattled. I stood there for a long time looking at the hideous rubber mask. A zombie. A mindless, rotting thing that existed only to serve. That is how she saw me. That is how she wanted the world to see me. I put on the suit. It was tight in the shoulders and smelled of industrial plastic. I put on the mask. My breath reflected back at me, hot and stifling. I looked in the small, cracked mirror on the wall. Gerald Thomas Vance was gone. In his place was a monster. But monsters Brittany forgot are dangerous. I walked out to the foyer at 6:30. The house was already buzzing with activity. A DJ was setting up a massive sound system in the living room, moving Beatrice's piano into a corner and using it as a stand for his speakers. I felt a surge of rage, but I swallowed it. I had to play the part. I had to be the zombie. Guests began to arrive at 7. These were not friends. These were sharks. They were Brittany's colleagues, real estate sharks, developers, people who measured human worth in square footage and commission checks. They arrived in Bentleys and Porsches, parking on the lawn. I used to manicure with scissors. They swept into the house, drinking champagne, laughing loudly, their voices echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "Oh my God, Brittany!" one woman shrieked, looking around. "This place is incredible! I cannot believe you finally got the old man to hand it over." Brittany beamed, clutching Brandon's arm. Brandon looked miserable, dressed as a vampire, pale and silent. "It took some convincing," Brittany said, winking. "But we did what was best for everyone. We are going to modernize it. You know, get rid of all this dark wood, open up the floor plan." I stood in the corner holding a silver tray of crab cakes. The mask concealed my expression, but my eyes were sharp. I watched them. I watched Hank and Linda dressed as a king and queen sitting on my antique velvet love seat, spilling red wine and wiping it up with a silk throw pillow. "Hey, zombie!" Hank yelled, snapping his fingers at me. "More wine and make it snappy." I walked over. My legs, still sore from where Brandon had pushed me, throbbed with every step. I poured the wine. Hank didn't look at me. He just grabbed the glass. "This is the life, huh, Linda?" he said, burping loudly. "Moving in here was the best idea Brittany ever had. We are set for life." I walked away, my grip on the silver tray so tight, my knuckles turned white under the gray gloves. The party grew louder. The bass from the music shook the floorboards. I circulated through the room, a silent, invisible servant. People bumped into me and didn't apologize. They treated me like a prop. "Great costume, old-timer," a young man said, patting me on the head condescendingly. "You really look like the Walking Dead." "Method acting, right." He laughed and walked away. I found myself near the kitchen door, needing a moment to breathe. The heat inside the mask was unbearable. Sweat was running down my face, stinging my eyes. I felt dizzy, not from confusion, but from pure, unadulterated hatred. Then the music stopped. A spotlight cut through the dim red lighting of the room. It landed on the grand staircase. Brittany stood there. She was dressed as Cleopatra, dripping in gold jewelry, some of it Beatrice's, I realized with a sick lurch in my stomach. She held a microphone. She looked down at the crowd of 100 people like a queen addressing her subjects. "Attention, everyone," she shouted. Her voice was amplified, booming through the house. The crowd cheered. Brandon stood a step below her, looking like a servant in her shadow. "Thank you all for coming to our housewarming/Halloween bash," Brittany yelled. "We are so thrilled to finally welcome you to the new Vance Manor. Cheers," the crowd roared. "I just want to take a moment to thank my amazing husband Brandon for making this happen," she continued, running a hand through Brandon's hair. "And of course, we have to mention the previous owner, Brandon's father, Gerald." She gestured vaguely toward the crowd. "He is around here somewhere, probably shuffling around in that adorable zombie costume. Give it up for Gerald, everyone." A smattering of polite, pitying applause rippled through the room. "We are so happy we could take him in," Brittany said, her voice dropping to a theatrical, somber tone. "You know, dementia is a terrible thing. It is heartbreaking to watch a strong man become a pitiful burden. But family is about sacrifice. We could not let him rot in a facility. We wanted him here where we can manage his care and manage his assets." Laughter rippled through the room, a cruel, knowing laughter. And speaking of assets, Brittany's voice brightened, becoming shrill with excitement. "I have a huge announcement." She pulled a rolled-up architectural blueprint from behind her back. "My blueprint. As many of you know, this house has a lot of wasted space, especially that gloomy old garden in the back, the one with all those overgrown rose bushes." My breath hitched. The room started to spin. "Well," Brittany shouted, unrolling the paper, "as of Monday, when the deed transfer was finalized, we have officially broken ground on a new project. Next week, bulldozers are coming in. We are ripping out that depressing garden and putting in a heated Olympic-sized infinity pool with a swim-up bar." The crowd went wild. They cheered. They whistled. "No more dusty flowers," Brittany screamed over the applause. "We are turning this place into the party palace it deserves to be." Out with the old, in with the new, my vision tunneled. The sound of the cheering faded into a dull roar, like the sound of the ocean before a tsunami. The rose garden. Beatrice's ashes were scattered there. We had planted those roses together on our first anniversary. Every petal, every thorn was a part of her, and Brittany knew it. She knew it because I had told her. I had begged her to respect that one patch of earth. She wasn't just building a pool. She was digging up my wife. She was erasing the last physical trace of the woman I loved to build a monument to her own vanity. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was the quiet metallic click of a safety being switched off. I looked at Brandon. He was clapping. He was clapping for the destruction of his mother's grave. I set the silver tray down on a side table. The glasses rattled. I stepped away from the wall. I walked into the center of the room. I did not shuffle. I did not limp. I walked with the stride of a man who had commanded construction sites for 40 years. I walked directly into the spotlight right at the bottom of the stairs. The guests nearest to me stopped cheering. They sensed the shift in energy. They saw the zombie butler standing tall, his fists clenched. Brittany looked down. She frowned. "Gerald," she said into the microphone, "what are you doing? Get back to work. We need more champagne." I reached up. I grabbed the chin of the rubber mask. The room went quiet. The DJ cut the background track, sensing the tension. I pulled the mask off. My hair was matted with sweat. My face was red. But my eyes were clear. They were burning with a cold blue fire that Brandon had not seen since he was a teenager, caught in a lie. I dropped the mask on the floor. It landed with a wet slap. I reached into the pocket of the zombie suit and pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen once. I held it up. Brittany laughed nervously. "Okay, Gerald. Very dramatic. Go take a nap. You are confusing everyone." I looked at her. I looked at the crowd of vultures. Then I looked at my son. "You mentioned the deed transfer, Brittany," I said. My voice was not amplified, but in the sudden silence of the ballroom, it carried to every corner. It was a voice of steel. "You mentioned the power of attorney. You mentioned that you now own this house." Brittany crossed her arms. "I do. We do. We have the papers. You signed them." I smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of the wolf who has just watched the sheep lock themselves in the slaughterhouse. "I did not sign them, Brittany," I said softly. A murmur went through the crowd. Brittany rolled her eyes. "Oh my God, here we go, the dementia talking. Yes, you did, Gerald. Brandon watched you. We have the documents." I took a step up the stairs. The crowd parted. "You have a document signed by Gerald Vance," I said, my voice rising. "But my legal name, the name required by the irrevocable trust that actually owns this property, is Gerald Thomas Vance. And that trust has a clause, Brittany. A clause that states that any attempt to transfer assets without a forensic competency hearing and a notarized signature of the full legal name constitutes fraud." Brittany's face faltered. She looked at Brandon. Brandon looked sick, and I continued, taking another step up. "The trust also states that if any beneficiary attempts to coerce the primary trustee, that is me, into signing documents under duress or under the influence of sedatives." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small Ziploc bag containing the tissue with the spit-out tea. "Then they are automatically disinherited. Permanently." The room was deadly silent now. You could hear a pin drop. "What? What are you talking about?" Brittany stammered, her voice losing its microphone bravado. "You are crazy. You are senile." I held up the phone again. "I have the video, Brittany," I said. "I have the video of you turning on the gas stove. I have the video of you stealing my watch. I have the recording of Brandon admitting to the theft of my retirement funds. And I have the recording of you 5 minutes ago admitting to the crowd that you coerced a man you claim has dementia into signing over his life. I looked at the crowd. The police are already on their way, I said calmly. And my lawyer, Mr. Sullivan, is with them. He has the eviction notice. I looked back at Brittany. She was pale beneath her Cleopatra makeup. She was trembling. You wanted a horror story for Halloween, Brittany, I asked. I took one last step, standing eye to eye with her on the staircase. Well, you got one. But you are not the queen. You are the intruder. I leaned in close, so close I could smell the fear radiating off her. The game is over, Brittany. Get out of my house. The silence in the ballroom was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a held breath, the heavy, suffocating pause before a dam breaks. I stood on the stairs, looking down at Brittany, who was still clutching the microphone like a weapon she had forgotten how to use. Her gold Cleopatra headdress was slightly askew, and her mascara was beginning to smudge under the heat of the spotlight, but her eyes were still defiant. She did not believe me. To her, I was just an old man making a scene, a nuisance to be managed. Then, the front doors of the manor, heavy oak doors that had withstood a century of Chicago winters, swung open with a force that rattled the stained glass windows. The sound was thunderous. Every head in the room turned. Framed in the doorway, silhouetted against the flashing blue and red lights of 3 patrol cars, stood a figure that Brittany did not recognize, but I knew better than my own reflection. It was Sullivan. He was wearing a charcoal wool coat, the collar turned up against the wind. In his hand he held a black leather briefcase. He did not look like a guest. He looked like an executioner. Flanking him were 4 uniformed police officers and a woman in a gray suit wearing a badge that identified her as an agent of Adult Protective Services. The music had stopped, but the flashing strobe lights from the DJ booth continued to spin, casting erratic shadows across the room. It gave the scene a surreal, nightmarish quality. Sullivan stepped into the foyer. He did not shout. He did not run. He walked with the slow, terrifying purpose of a man who knows he holds all the aces. "Who are you?" Brittany demanded, her voice shrill and breaking. "This is a private party. You cannot just barge in here." Sullivan stopped at the base of the stairs, ignoring her completely. He looked up at me. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice deep and gravelly, carrying effortlessly to the back of the room. "I apologize for the delay." The judge was having dinner, but he was kind enough to sign the emergency orders between courses. He lifted the briefcase and set it down on the antique table Brittany had been using to stack gifts. The click of the latches opening echoed like gunshots. Brittany stormed down the stairs, her gold cape billowing behind her. "Excuse me, I am the owner of this house. I demand to know what is going on." Sullivan turned to her slowly. He looked her up and down, taking in the costume, the jewelry, the arrogance. He pulled a document from the briefcase. "You are Brittany Vance?" he asked. "I am," she snapped. "And this is my husband, Brandon. We have power of attorney over Gerald. If you are here because he called you, you should know he is suffering from advanced dementia. He is not competent to hire legal counsel." Sullivan smiled. It was a cold, razor-sharp smile. "I was not hired today, Mrs. Vance. I have been Gerald's personal attorney for 30 years, and I am also the chief legal officer for the Chicago Historical Preservation Trust." He held up the document. "And you are correct about one thing. You do have a power of attorney document signed by a Gerald Vance." Brittany crossed her arms, smirking. "Exactly. So get out." Sullivan let the paper drop onto the table. However, he continued, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerous. "That document is worthless. In fact, it is less than worthless. It is evidence of a felony." Brittany laughed, but it sounded hysterical. "What are you talking about?" Sullivan picked up another document, this one bound in blue linen. "This house, the Victorian manor you are currently defiling with plastic skeletons and cheap gin, does not belong to Gerald Vance. It has not belonged to him for 5 years." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Brandon stepped forward, his face pale beneath his vampire makeup. What Brandon whispered. That is impossible. Dad has lived here forever. Sullivan turned to Brandon. Your father, Sullivan explained, speaking slowly, as if to a child, donated this property to the Historical Preservation Trust 5 years ago, shortly after your mother passed. He did so to ensure that it would never be sold, subdivided, or destroying by greedy developers. In exchange, the trust granted him a life estate. Sullivan paused, letting the term hang in the air. Do you know what a life estate is? Brandon shook his head, mute. It means, Sullivan said, that Gerald has the exclusive right to live and occupy and enjoy this property until the moment of his death. He is a tenant for life. He does not own the title. The trust owns the title. Sullivan turned back to Brittany. Which means, Mrs. Vance, that Gerald could not sign the house over to you, even if he wanted to. You cannot give away what you do not own. Your deed transfer is void. Your renovation plans are illegal. And your threat to build a pool in the garden? Sullivan stepped closer to her, looming over her. That constitutes a threat to destroy historical property owned by a non-profit organization. That is a federal crime. Brittany staggered back. She looked at the guests. They were staring at her with open mouths. The sharks were smelling blood, and for the first time, Brittany was not the predator. But the power of attorney! She shrieked, grabbing the paper from the table. It gives us control over his finances. We can still evict him. We can put him in a home. Sullivan shook his head. Read the signature, Mrs. Vance. Brittany looked at the paper. It says Gerald Vance, she yelled. Sullivan pulled a magnifying glass from his pocket and held it over the document Gerald had signed earlier that week. The trust requires the signature of Gerald Thomas Vance for any legal action. But more importantly, look at the handwriting. Look at the tremor. Look at the trailing ink. He turned to the police officers. Officer Miller, Sullivan said, We have video evidence secured on a remote server of these two individuals administering unprescribed sedatives to Mr. Vance prior to coercion. We have video of them isolating him, depriving him of food, and gaslighting him into believing he was insane. The female agent from Adult Protective Services stepped forward. She held a clipboard. Mrs. Vance, Mr. Vance, she said, her voice stern. I am placing you both under immediate investigation for elder abuse, financial exploitation of a vulnerable senior, and false imprisonment. Brittany dropped the paper. It fluttered to the floor, landing next to the zombie mask I had discarded. No, she whispered. No. This is a mistake. He is lying. He is the crazy one. Officer Miller stepped forward. He was a large man, and he did not look amused by the costumes. Ma'am, he said, we have seen the videos. The gas stove incident. We saw you turn the knobs. Brittany's face drained of all color. She looked like she was going to vomit. Sullivan checked his watch. Now regarding the trespassing, he said briskly, Since you have no legal claim to this property, and since your presence here constitutes a clear and present danger to the life tenant, I have an emergency order of protection signed by Judge Harrison. He handed the order to the officer. It states that Brandon Vance, Brittany Vance, and all associated parties must vacate the premises immediately. If they remain on the property past 8 o'clock, they are to be arrested for criminal trespassing. Sullivan looked at the grandfather clock. It is 7:50. You have 10 minutes. The room erupted into chaos. The guests did not wait to be told twice. They were wealthy people with reputations to protect. They did not want to be seen at a party that was being raided by the police. They put down their wine glasses. They grabbed their coats. They ran for the door. I stood on the stairs and watched them flee. I watched the people who had laughed at me, the people who had treated me like a servant, scramble over each other to escape. Brittany stood frozen in the center of the foyer. Her empire had crumbled in less than 5 minutes. 10 minutes, she screamed. But our clothes, our furniture, my parents. Hank and Linda came running from the living room. Hank was holding a bottle of wine. "What is going on?" Hank yelled. "Why are the cops here?" "Get out, Dad," Brandon yelled, finally finding his voice. "Just get out." "We have to go, but where?" Linda wailed. "We gave up our apartment." "That is not my concern," Sullivan said coldly. "But if you are not off this property in 9 minutes, you will be sleeping in a holding cell." I walked down the stairs. I walked slowly, my hand sliding down the banister I had polished for 40 years. I walked right up to Brittany. She was trembling so hard her gold jewelry rattled. I looked her in the eye. "You said I was a burden," I said quietly. "You said I was taking up space." I gestured to the open door where the cold October wind was blowing in. "Now you have all the space in the world, Brittany." She looked at me with pure venom. "I will sue you," she hissed. "I will take everything." "You have nothing to sue with," I replied. "You are broke, Brittany. I saw the bank transfers. You spent everything, and Brandon is about to be indicted for embezzlement." Brandon looked up, his eyes wide with terror. "Yes," I said to my son. "I know about the retirement fund. Sullivan knows, and soon the district attorney will know." Officer Miller stepped forward, his hand resting on his belt. "Time to go, folks. Move it." The humiliation was absolute. Brittany, still dressed as the Queen of the Nile, had to run out into the cold night without a coat. Brandon the vampire stumbled after her, looking like a lost child. Hank and Linda, clutching their cheap costumes, followed, cursing and screaming at each other. Kayla grabbed her children, who were crying because they couldn't find their shoes, and dragged them out the door in their socks. I walked to the doorway. I watched them standing on the lawn, shivering in the harsh lights of the police cars. I watched the neighbors coming out onto their porches, pointing and whispering. I watched Brittany trying to argue with an officer, only to have him point sternly toward the street. They had to walk. They couldn't take the cars because Sullivan had slapped a lien on them as assets purchased with stolen funds. They walked down the driveway, a parade of monsters and fools, disappearing into the darkness of the street. Sullivan walked up beside me. He stood shoulder to shoulder with me, watching them go. "That went well," he said dryly. I looked at the empty driveway. The wind blew a few dead leaves across the stone. "Yes," I said. "It did." Officer Miller walked up to the porch. "Mr. Vance," he said respectfully, "we will have a patrol car stationed here tonight, just in case they try to come back. And we will need you to come down to the station tomorrow to finalize the statements." I nodded. "Thank you, officer." The police cars turned off their lights. The sirens faded. The last of the guests drove away. Sullivan turned to me. "I sent a crew to clear out their things," he said. "They will be here in the morning. They will put everything in storage. You won't have to lift a finger." I looked back into the house. It was a mess. There were plastic skeletons, spilled wine, and muddy footprints everywhere. But the air felt lighter. "Thank you, Sullivan," I said. He nodded, squeezed my shoulder, and walked to his car. I was alone. I walked back into the house and closed the heavy oak door. I turned the lock. The click was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. I walked into the living room. It was silent. The terrible music was gone. I walked over to the portrait of Beatrice. I picked up the napkin I had used to wipe her face. I looked at the stain on her cheek. "I will get you restored, my love," I whispered. "I will find the best artist in the city." I looked around the room. It was going to take weeks to clean this up. It would take months to repair the damage to the floors and the walls. But as I stood there, surrounded by the wreckage of the party, I realized something. I wasn't a zombie. I wasn't a servant. And I wasn't a victim. I was the architect. And the demolition phase was finally over. Now the reconstruction could begin. The heavy oak door clicked shut, cutting off the wailing of my daughter-in-law and her parents. The silence that rushed back into the foyer was sudden and absolute, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen and the ragged, terrified breathing of the man standing 5 feet away from me. Brandon was alone. For the first time in years, he was completely, utterly alone. His vampire cape hung limp around his shoulders, a ridiculous costume for a man whose life was crumbling in real time. The fake blood painted at the corners of his mouth no longer looked like a festive decoration. It looked like a premonition of the violence he had inflicted on our family. He looked at the door, then at the police officers who were still standing by the entrance, their hands resting casually near their holsters. Then, slowly terrified, he turned his eyes to me. "Dad," he whispered. The word came out as a broken croak. I did not answer. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, my hand still resting on the newel post. I looked at him, searching for the curly-haired boy who used to ask me to check under his bed for monsters. I searched for the young man who had once promised to make me proud at his college graduation. But those people were gone. In their place stood a stranger in a cheap suit, a man who had watched his wife poison my home and had done nothing but hand her the matches. "Dad, please," Brandon said, taking a shaky step forward. His hands were trembling, reached out in a pleading gesture. "You have to understand. It was her. It was all Brittany. She is controlling. She made me do it. I never wanted to hurt you. I was just trying to keep the peace. You know how she gets." I looked at his outstretched hands, the same hands that had shoved me to the floor 2 nights ago, the same hands that had forged my signature. "She made you push me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "She made you watch me fall. She made you stand there while she mocked your mother's death." Brandon flinched as if I had struck him. "I was scared, Dad. I was scared she would leave me. I was scared I wouldn't see the baby." "There is no baby, Brandon," I said coldly. He froze. "What?" I walked over to the table where Sullivan had left his briefcase. I opened it and pulled out a manila envelope. "I spoke to your sister-in-law, Kayla, while you were busy setting up the party," I said. "It is amazing what people will tell you when you offer to pay off their credit card debt. Brittany is not pregnant. She never was. It was a lie to get me to lower my guard. It was a lie to get access to the trust fund, and you knew it." Brandon's face went from pale to a sickly shade of gray. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The foundation of his defense, the noble father protecting his unborn child, evaporated instantly. "But that is not why you are still here, Brandon." I continued, tapping the envelope against my palm. "You are not here because you are a liar. You are not here because you are a bad son. Being a disappointment is not a crime." I looked at Sullivan. He nodded once, a grim signal to proceed. I turned back to Brandon. "You are here because of B&B Ventures LLC." The name of his shell company hit him like a physical blow. His knees actually buckled, and he had to grab the edge of the antique console table to stay upright. "Dad, wait," he gasped, sweat pouring down his face, mixing with the white makeup. "We can fix this. I can explain. It was just a loan. I was going to pay it back." "I am not talking about the $15,000 you stole from me, Brandon," I said, my voice hardening into steel. "I am talking about the $300,000 you embezzled from your employer Stratos Dynamics." Brandon's eyes bulged. He looked around the room looking for an exit, but Officer Miller had already stepped in front of the door. "I know the CEO of Stratus, Brandon," I said. "We play golf on Sundays. When I saw the transfer from my account to your LLC, I got curious. I asked Sullivan to do a little digging. We found invoices, dozens of them. Invoices for consulting services that were never performed billed to a shell company registered in your name. You were not just stealing from me. You were draining your company dry to fund Brittany's lifestyle. No, Branson whimpered. No, no, no. Sullivan stepped forward. We sent the evidence to the district attorney this morning. Brandon Sullivan said, his voice void of any sympathy. They issued a warrant an hour ago. That is why the officers are really here. The trespassing was just the appetizer. This is the main course. Officer Miller walked up to Brandon. He reached for the handcuffs on his belt. The metallic ratchet sound as he pulled them free seemed to echo through the cavernous foyer. Brandon Vance, the officer, said, his voice bored and professional. You are under arrest for grand larceny, wire fraud, and corporate embezzlement. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. Brandon didn't turn around. He dropped to his knees. Dad! He screamed, reaching for my legs. Dad, don't let them do this. I am your son. You can't let them take me to prison. I will die in there. Please, I will do anything. I will sign whatever you want. I stepped back, pulling my leg away from his grasping hand. I looked down at him. A 40-year-old man sobbing on the floor in a vampire costume. It was pathetic. It was tragic. And it was necessary. You made your choice, Brandon, I said, looking down at him with a mixture of pity and revulsion. You chose her. You chose the money. You chose the lie. Dad, please, I am sorry, I love you. He was sobbing now, snot and tears was running down his face. Officer Miller grabbed him by the arm and hauled him to his feet. Stop resisting, the officer barked. He spun Brandon around. Brandon struggled, but he was weak. The handcuffs snapped onto his wrists. Click, click. The sound was final. It was the period at the end of a very long, very painful sentence. I watched as they dragged him toward the door. He was dead weight, his feet dragging on the parquet floor, the vampire cape bunching up around his waist. He was screaming my name over and over again, a broken record of regret that had come too late. Dad, Dad, help me. I stood still. I did not look away. I owed it to myself to watch. I owed it to Beatrice. As they reached the door, I spoke one last time. Goodbye, Brandon, I said softly. The door opened. The cold wind rushed in again, and then he was gone. The door closed. The screaming was cut off instantly. I stood in the silence of the foyer. Sullivan walked over to me. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, a silent presence of support. I looked at the floor where Brandon had knelt. There was a smudge of white makeup on the wood. It is over, Gerald Sullivan said quietly. I nodded. I felt an immense weight lift off my chest, leaving behind a hollow ache. I had lost my son, but in truth I had lost him a long time ago. Tonight was just the funeral. I turned to Sullivan. Lock the gate when you leave, Sullivan, I said, and tell the officers, tell them thank you. I turned and walked toward the stairs. I needed to go to the master bedroom. I needed to open the windows and let the smell of them out. I needed to reclaim my house. I climbed the stairs one by one. I was an old man alone in a big house. But as I reached the top landing and looked down at the empty foyer, I realized I wasn't afraid of the silence anymore. The silence was clean. The silence was mine. And for the first time in months, I could breathe. 7 days. That is exactly how long it has been since the sirens faded into the night and the heavy oak door clicked shut on the chapter of my life titled Betrayal. I am sitting in the garden now. It is 7 in the morning, the golden hour when the light hits the dew on the leaves and turns the whole world into a glistening jewel. The air is crisp and cold, typical for November in Chicago, but I do not feel the chill. I am wearing my favorite wool cardigan, the one Beatrice knitted for me years ago, and it feels like a warm hug. On the small iron table next to me sits a cup of Earl Grey tea. It is steaming, sending ribbons of bergamot-scented vapor into the air. I pick it up and take a sip. It tastes of citrus and comfort. There is no bitter aftertaste of sedatives. There is no fear that the liquid is poisoned. It is just tea. And the simple act of drinking it in peace feels like a victory greater than any skyscraper I ever designed. The house behind me is silent. But it is not the heavy, oppressive silence of a tomb that I used to fear. It is the clean, restful silence of a library or a cathedral. The professional cleaning crew Sullivan hired spent 3 days here. They scrubbed the mud from the parquet floors. They steam-cleaned the wine stains from the carpets. They removed every trace of the cheap plastic Halloween decorations. The zombie mask is gone. The fake blood is gone. The smell of stale cigarette smoke and desperation has been aired out, replaced by the scent of beeswax polish and fresh lilies. My home has returned to me. It is bruised, yes. There are scratches on the wainscoting that will need to be sanded down, and the velvet love seat will need to be reupholstered. But the structure is sound. The foundation held. I look out at the rose bushes. A week ago, Brittany stood on the stairs and promised to bury them under tons of concrete to build a swimming pool. Today, they are still here. I spent the morning pruning them, cutting away the dead wood so that new growth can return in the spring. I reach out and touch a thorny stem. "We did it, Beatrice," I whisper to the wind. "They didn't take it. They didn't take us." I pull a small photo from my pocket. It is the picture of us on our honeymoon, young and invincible. I prop it up against the teapot. "I know what you would say if you were here." I continue speaking to her as I do every morning. "You would ask about Brandon. You would ask if I am heartbroken. And the truth is, Beatrice, I am. A part of me will always mourn the little boy with the curly hair who used to hold my hand. But I realized something this week as I sat in the quiet of this big, beautiful house. I did not lose my son last week. We lost him years ago. We lost him to greed. We lost him to weakness. The man who was dragged out in handcuffs was not our boy. He was a stranger wearing our son's face. And mourning a stranger is a waste of the time I have left. I hear the crunch of gravel on the driveway. I do not jump. I do not feel anxiety. I know who it is. Sullivan walks around the side of the house. He is not wearing his executioner's coat today. He is wearing a casual jacket and carrying a box of pastries from the bakery downtown. "Morning, Gerald," he calls out. "I brought croissants. The real ones with the almond paste you like." He sits down opposite me. He looks tired but satisfied. "How is the quiet treating you?" he asks, pouring himself a cup of tea. "It is loud, Sullivan," I reply with a smile. "It is loud with possibilities." Sullivan chuckles. He reaches into his jacket and pulls out a thick envelope. "I have the paperwork for the foundation," he says. "The Beatrice Vance Initiative for Elder Justice. It is all set up. We have already received 3 donations from the neighbors who saw what happened." I nod, running my hand over the papers. This is my new project. I am not going to spend my retirement playing golf or waiting to die. I am going to use my resources, my knowledge, and my voice to help other seniors who are being abused, manipulated, and silenced by their own families. "We are going to hire lawyers, Sullivan," I say, my voice firm. "We are going to hire forensic accountants. We are going to provide emergency housing for old people who get kicked out by their children. No one should have to sleep in a damp room behind a kitchen in their own home. No one should have to be afraid of their own tea." Sullivan smiles. "You are going to be busy, Gerald." "Good," I say. "I have a lot of energy. I feel 20 years younger." Sullivan hesitates for a moment. He reaches into his pocket again and pulls out a smaller white envelope. It has the stamp of the county jail on it. "This arrived at my office for you," he says quietly. "It is from Brandon." I look at the letter. I can see his handwriting. It is shaky, desperate. I can imagine what it says. Promises, apologies, requests for bail money, requests for a better lawyer. I do not reach for it. Sullivan waits. Do you want to read it? I look at the rose bushes. I look at the open sky. I think about the night he pushed me. I think about the moment he forged my signature. No, I say. I pick up my lighter, the one I used to light the candle for Beatrice. I flick it open. The flame dances in the morning breeze. Sullivan holds the letter out. I light the corner of it. We watch as the paper catches fire. The orange flame eats away at the envelope, curling the edges, turning the words into black ash. I watch my son's name disappear into smoke. Some doors, Sullivan, I say softly, as the ashes float away on the wind, are not meant to be reopened. I have forgiven him in my heart, so that I do not carry the poison of hatred. But forgiveness does not mean access. He made his bed. Now he must sleep in it. Sullivan nods, dropping the last charred corner into the ashtray. You are a tough man, Gerald Vance. I am a survivor, I correct him. I lean back in my chair and close my eyes, letting the sun warm my face. I used to be terrified of this. I used to be terrified of sitting in this garden alone. I thought that loneliness was the worst thing that could happen to a human being. I thought that silence was an enemy. But I was wrong. I have learned the most important lesson of my life in these past few weeks. I learned that true family is not defined by whose DNA you share. It is defined by who stands next to you when the storm comes. It is defined by respect, by kindness, by loyalty. I learned that being alone is not the same as being lonely. Solitude is a sanctuary. It is a place where you can hear your own thoughts, where you can heal, where you can be yourself without fear of judgment or exploitation. Living with toxic people, living with people who view you as a burden or a paycheck, that is true loneliness. That is a crowded room where no one sees you. That is a conversation where no one hears you. I open my eyes. The garden is bright. The future is unwritten. I pick up the croissant Sullivan brought. I take a bite. It is sweet, flaky, and delicious. So Sullivan, I say, brushing the crumbs from my cardigan. About the guest wing. I was thinking of converting it. Converting it, Sullivan asks. Into what? Into offices, I say. For the foundation. We need space for the paralegals, and maybe a few guest rooms for emergency cases. What do you think? Sullivan grins. I think Beatrice would love it. I look at her photo. Yes, she would. She would love that this house is full of life again. Real life. Useful life. I take another sip of tea. I am Gerald Vance. I am 71 years old. I have no children to inherit my fortune. I have no wife to hold my hand. But as I sit here surrounded by the beauty I fought to protect, I realize I am the richest man in the world. Because I have my dignity. I have my freedom. And for the first time in a long time, I have a tomorrow that belongs only to me. And to you listening to my story from wherever you are in the world. I want to tell you this. Do not let anyone tell you that you are too old, too weak, or too dependent to demand respect. Do not let guilt shackle you to people who hurt you. Your life belongs to you until the very last breath. Defend it, cherish it, and never ever be afraid to close the door on those who do not know how to love you. Thank you for listening. If my story touched you, or if you have ever had to make a hard choice to protect your own peace, let me know in the comments below. I read every single one of them. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, the sun always rises even after the longest, darkest Halloween night. See you in the next story. Goodbye for now.